Hello, this is Ajani. Although I normally record astrology videos, I wanted to take the time to put a video down explaining why I'm a feminist. So, I've been a teacher at a college for the past 9 years, and my job just ended. College is closing, and I've recently started looking at writing and activism and all kinds of other things. While I was a teacher, I taught cultural diversity and sociology and political science and things like that. And one of the things that I taught was feminism. I actually got into it while I was there. And so these days, now that I'm not teaching, um, I have since shifted my priorities in the world closer towards the feminism that I taught while at the school. And unfortunately, I've noticed that every time I tell people this, they don't believe me. I'm like, well, it's not really me, it's more like them. They say, come on, dude, you're male, you're black, shouldn't you be out there pumping your fist for Malcolm X or something like that? I say, no, no, I'm a bona fide feminist. So I just wanted to explain what that's all about, just, for people who are curious. First of all, I encourage males out there to consider feminism, particularly second wave feminism. Take a sip of my tea there. Okay, so while I was there at the college, I noticed certain things. We're in the third wave of feminism, and for those who don't know, feminism has three waves. The first wave is probably not the kind of feminist that most people are today, because that one concerned voting rights, women's suffrage. Finally got that in 1920, Woodrow Wilson, all that other stuff. And so most feminists out there are not going to be first wavers because voting rights are already there. Second wave says, don't treat me like a piece of meat. You've given us voting rights, but there's still something missing in the social hierarchy. There's something about having the women's perspective basically be disregarded. Women had about 3 decades of voting rights, and still they weren't getting their foot in the door, and they were still kind of saying they were being told to basically stay in the kitchen and do that kind of 1950s father knows best thing. And that kind of feminism actually is the origin of some of the good parts of third wave. Third wave is known for girl power, so Beyonce, Lady Gaga, Madonna. I like to tell my students that it begins with Madonna and the cone bra. Now that we live in the third age, the third wave of feminism, some people say it's a fourth wave going, but we'll just talk about the three. Now that we're in the third wave of feminism, basically you get a lot of the whole girl power stuff, which is fine to a point. Now, as a male, however, one thing that I've noticed is that third wave feminism is a little bit misleading. There are some places where it went right, and there are some places where I believe it's gone very wrong. Um, as I prepare to transition out of my teaching post and into newer endeavors, mainly in terms of activism, I'm struck by the problems with third wave. On the one hand, third wave feminism comes on the heels of second wave, where people finally acknowledge other issues. Transnational feminism started to get more kind of attention. I got Gayatri Spivak writing things. We started questioning the old male forms of psychodynamics. And right now I'm reading something called the Handbook of Feminist Research. It's pretty cool. Basically says that it's not just about inequality between males and females. It's inequality between masculine and feminine ways of thinking. And masculine ways tend to say, I don't know what's out there. I'm just going to plant my flag, and I'm going to wag my finger and declare things, and I'm going to launch my missile, and I'm going to beat my chest. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. If you think about our politics, if you think about our educational systems, if you think about our institutional systems, a lot of them reflect a worsening of the masculinism, which was a problem in the second wave feminism. On the other hand, as a teacher, one of the things I notice, not just as a teacher, but as a male, is that this girl power thing, it's cool on the one hand, but on the other hand, you get a lot of the kind of girl power dynamic without actual substance. Second wave feminism basically revolved around collectivizing. It says we need to define, or at least outline for males who are treating us like second-class citizens, what the feminine perspective actually is, because it doesn't dawn on them that they're doing anything differently. And so they said the feminine perspective is classified by a kind of fluidity in discussion. We gather data first, and then we make moves. We don't just go out into the unknown and plant our flag or whatever. Um, it was it was more about letting groups define themselves instead of letting, say, to be anachronistic about it, an advertiser define yourself for you. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this because I don't have a lot of time in this recording, but one of the things that I want to say is that as a male, I have recently dealt with a lot of women who live in the third wave age who have definitely picked up the girl power notions, but they have standards for both what it is to be a strong woman and what it is for me and other males to be male. And those standards are actually male. They're not indicative of feminism. My general argument, as somebody who studies astrology, which is not considered a real science, um, by the way, as an aside, I just got my PhD, and I got my PhD in a topic which was actually easier to do than the astrology was. There's a statistical method that is more sophisticated in astrology than it is in the so-called hard sciences. I use something called the canonical correlation, and it is used to study another thing called the interpersonal circumplex. The circumplex is like a really light version. It's cool, but it's a really light version of the astral wheel, and the astral wheel actually is more sophisticated. But because astrology um, deals with kind of holistic patterns, and you've got this maze of stars and everything, it is not currently considered a hard science. And so what the patriarchal scientific system would say is that you're just working with bullshit. And that's too bad, because I find that my astrology is actually more useful than my PhD is. um, I have a lot of feminine perspectives as a black male. I've grown up under the whole, sports entertainment, be macho, holler when you see the girl, and all that other stuff. And I actually don't live like that. I'm a Taoist. I'm a Buddhist. Uh, I'm a teacher, and I'm an oldest brother. So I tend to sacrifice first. I tend to mother first. I have a lot of identity perspectives, even as a straight male, which are basically considered feminine. And I've learned, as somebody who has to stand up in the class and not rage out on a class that's getting crazy, you know, it's a lot of people may not understand this, but as a black male, it's basically easier for me to get thrown in jail for whatever reason, for me to get stopped, for me to get questioned, for me to get written up, for me to get fired. And I notice this. So I have to develop a whole bunch of non-masculine tactics in order to survive academia. Those tactics, if I take them back to the neighborhood that I grew up in, might be considered weak. Um, Here's my main thing. Why am I a feminist, and why should males consider the feminist perspective? I believe that when second wave feminism demanded that women be treated um, as though they have a legitimate perspective, um, it laid the foundation for the third wave, where we really don't see those kinds of overt instances of sexism now. The problem is that the patriarchal system, the one that waves its finger and says, I declare you to be this, didn't go away. So we do have collectivizing mechanisms like Facebook that allow people to get together and define themselves in terms of their clique, in terms of their home groups or whatever. But those collectivizing systems, which would have been considered good in second wave feminism, are actually appropriated by, I don't know, people with political agendas, advertising agencies. And so basically you've got these feminine components which have a masculine system still hovering over them, and it basically denies the rights that the second waivers were demanding. I find in general that there was a point at which third wave feminism split off from the original second wave intent, and it makes life difficult for all of us. People look at society today, and a lot of people I talk to are just like they're really pessimistic about, I don't know, just the world around them, especially with all this information. They're scared for the loss of their identity. And when people are scared, what do? They run to daddy. They run to, I don't know, their jobs or the economy or some kind of father figure. And so the instances of chest-beating masculinity is on the rise because we don't know how to solve problems from a more balanced perspective. People have told me, and this is what I learned while I was researching feminism just to teach it in my class, that The reason males should consider feminism is because they have mothers and daughters, and I think that that's not a good enough reason. I'm a male. I don't care. I mean, males throughout the ages have been sexist, and they've had mothers and daughters. That's not a good reason for a male to consider feminism. A good reason for a male to consider feminism is that from their mothers and to their daughters, they learn to handle issues in ways other than, I'm a man, let me launch my missile at you, and you launch your missile at me, and we'll see how many troops we can deploy. Lots of issues, like environmental issues, educational issues, gender issues, equality issues, the gap between the rich and the poor, are not solved by missiles or troops or guns or that kind of thing. But if you don't have a society which doesn't know how to look at those things, if you don't have a society that knows how to entertain balanced perspectives, then you basically have chaos. I'm transitioning between jobs from one realm of academia to another, and I'm not happy at all about moving from a patriarchal system which wants to constrain my research to where I can't do astrology, for example, or I can't really legitimately be Taoist or whatever. Wants to constrain my thinking because the institution has tenure goals or publishing goals or whatever, and that's a minor thing. It's not international. It's not national defense or anything like that. It's not that people should be worried about the world out there. It's that people should be, well, Americans, Westerners, should be on alert that the problem-solving mechanisms that we employ on all levels, from the city level to the national level, even among our friends and our family for defining boyfriends and girlfriends or whatever, those mechanisms are constrained to a certain kind of macho thought, and that's too bad. It makes relationships difficult, and it makes certain solutions impossible. There's a lot more to this, but I guess to wrap up, the reason I'm a feminist is because the feminist perspective is not just about males versus females. We would call that essentialism in some way. It's about masculine ways of thinking, feminine ways of thinking, and balance. Every one of us solves issues and navigates our relationships in a way that is balanced. Sometimes we do the chest beating, but other times we actually listen. And if we don't legitimize the whole listening part or the long range part, we are subscribing to the patriarchy no matter how many doses of girl power we get every day. I'm encouraging people to consider feminism, whatever wave you're in, because the good of society is at stake. The wiser we are about the various methods that we have for solving our problems, the better society will be. And I think that the feminists offer the greatest look, the most sophisticated look at the entire terrain, which is traced out by both masculinity versus femininity together.